What's going on, everybody? So what I wanted to do is put together a quick video going over the difference between a coaching business at scale and an agency at scale. Now, after talking to a lot of different coaching business owners and agency owners, one thing that I find time and time again is that they believe that both of their margins at scale will look roughly the same, right? So they see, like, for example, agency owners might see a coaching business and they see their margins and they're like, oh my God, you guys are doing, 200K a month and your profit margins are like 60, even 70% at times, right? And then an agency owner or a coaching business owner might look at an agency model and go, ooh, that's really attractive. We can have a lot of clients, recurring revenue. But one thing that they keep forgetting to actually account for is A, churn, as well as B, the margins aren't as solid with an agency at scale. So with that said, before I dive into this video, what I want to just quickly go over here is, it depends on what kind of business that you feel like you personally want to operate in, right? So if you want to be a coach and then you really love coaching and you love the high cash flow and you love building out and managing a team of CSMs and you really like the marketing aspect of things too, which marketing is in both of those, then a coaching business might just be better for you to run. And an agency, if you like having recurring cash flow, if you like building out more of a management team and a team that actually fulfills in a recurring manner on your clients and typically building out more of like operations infrastructure to support, then an agency might be more for you, right? So what a lot of people do though is they're coaches who are doing a lot, who are generating a lot of income, and they're like, oh well, if I do an agency model, they can have more recurring clients, or they run an agency model. They go, ooh, a coaching business is just so much more high cash flow, right? So what you want to do is actually take the time to actually think, what kind of business do you want to run? So with that said, what I did here was I broke down the different margins for these different types of businesses, or we'll be doing this together. So what I want to show you is typically what I see with companies that are doing over 100K per month in both of these areas. So before we even do that, let's start with before 50K or 100K per month, right? So we got our coaching business, then we got an agency. So this is before 100K, right? So at this point, if you are a coaching business, right, we have usually a few things. We have fulfillment costs, sales costs, marketing, and obviously we have our profit margin. So first things first, let's look at the fulfillment costs. Now, what I typically see for fulfillment is anywhere between 5 to 7%. Now, this is, again, depending on how you guys are running your business. If you need to, this also depends like who you're kind of hiring, right? If you're hiring top level experts in your niche, like let's say you are a medical coach and you actually are hiring doctors to come in, or if you are a financial coach and you're hiring CPAs or certified financial planners, CFPs, then you might see your fulfillment costs go from anywhere from like 7 even 10%. 15% would be considered pretty high for a coaching business, but it can get up that high again depending on who you are, who you're hiring. So right, so this is typically based on hiring, or this is like team. This is usually like a CSM, right? A client success manager. This could also be softwares as well. Softwares typically would fall under overhead or something along those lines. But just let's just say in terms of fulfilling on the clients, like in terms of your total cost of goods sold, your software would also be included in there as well too. So typically this is really all you should see for fulfillment costs when you're early on. Again, there's some nuanced things in here too, depending on the offer. Your fulfillment costs may also include things like contractors or stuff like that too. But for the most part, you usually just have like a CSM or maybe 2 CSMs and then some software. So in terms of sales, once you're before 100K a month, like honestly, you're probably doing most of your own setting and your own sales calls. But once you get upwards of around the, like 50-ish K a month range is usually when you'll hire your first like setter or closer to come on the team. So let's say we're in the like 70-80% mark, getting close to 100%. Let's say you have a setter that you're paying 10% commission to, and a closer that a setter you're paying 5% commission to, plus a closer you're paying 10% to, so that's 15%. On top of this, you may also have might be paying them a small base, so this could even be upwards of like 18% or even 20%, especially if you're early on and you're trying to get some initial buy-in from like a really good setter or closer onto the team. You may offer some sort of base incentive, but let's just call it 15% for now because that's pretty standard. So again, this would be like a setter and a closer. And then down here, we got marketing. If you are currently at this point, you're probably either working with an agency. My camera just froze, by the way. So if you ever see me pause here, it's because my camera freezes. Loves to do that for no reason. But if you're, so at this point, you're either working with an agency or you're typically paying, or you're, or you might just be doing this yourself, right? Maybe you joined a coaching program, or maybe you're just a media buyer, have media buying experience, or you're just kind of winging it with like, DM ads or simple ad strategies, you might be spending somewhere around, let's say like let's say early on, typically you might see a 3 to 5x ROAS. Let's say on the low end, it's like a 3x ROAS. Plus you're working with a marketing person, so let's just call it like 40%. Even up, I would say this is anywhere from 30 to 50%. Again, if you're running your own ads and you're crushing it early on, you should see a pretty high ROAS, right? So maybe 20%. But let's just say you're not the best marketer, but you're okay. Let's call it 30%. So now at this point here, again, this is usually just like ad spend, and you're probably not working with an agency. If you are, then you can obviously expect your marketing expenses to be slightly more here. Like if you're working with an agency, maybe this 30%. Like if you're making like 50K a month and you're paying an agency like 10%, like 5K a month, so we can call this like 40%, right? So now at this point we have, let's just call this 5% to make the math simpler. So that's 20%, 40. So you're walking away with a 40% profit margin right here. So again, this is what the owner usually takes home because it's usually just a coach, right? So at this point, this is usually what you're running with. Now, again, like this is when you're getting close to the 100%. I mean, like let's say you don't have a sales team yet. We cut this out to 0, right? That's 0. You're doing all the fulfillment, so that cost is 0. Your marketing is just you doing outbound. So let's say it's even like, and maybe you're running some simple ads. Let's call that 30%. Now you're walking away with 70% margins, right? So this could be anywhere from like 40 to 70%, depending on the team. So again, like early on, this could be 0 to 15%. And right here, this could be 0 to let's say 7%. And then down here, marketing can be, I mean, technically, if you're just doing outbound, you have a 0% marketing cost. But let's say you're running some simple DM ads or something, let's say like 20 to 40%. So this is typically what you can expect before you even start scaling your coaching business. Now, if we go over to an agency, right, typically if you're starting an agency, chances are you're a media buyer already, or you've partnered with a media buyer, or you've hired a media buyer, right? But you're probably doing the media buying in the beginning. So your fulfillment cost at this point would be 0%, right? And so because you're the one doing all the fulfillment, let's call it like 2% just due to softwares or whatever. Sales team, again, you're probably running a sales team here. Or maybe, let's say you have one junior media buyer who's like underneath you, because again, we're not saying like, or this could be, I guess, 0 to... a good media buyer might cost you like 5K a month. So yeah, anywhere probably around like 10% is what you'd be paying in terms of fulfillment costs. Now from here, we have our sales team, and this right here would be again 0 to 15%, typically the same. The only difference here is like for an agency, if you're reselling every single month, what you probably have is some sort of recurring going on, right? So if you have some sort of recurring payment going on, or excuse me, recurring, you have clients on recurring, you probably have CSMs who are upselling every single month. And typically what you'll see there is like an 8 to 10% upsell, percentage given to the client. And again, depending on how long you keep clients for, the more you actually get to save. So I'm actually going to break concept really quick, which is called your CAC. So for anyone who does not know, your CAC is your, let me just make this text a bit bigger here. CAC is your cost per acquisition, or customer acquisition cost. Customer acquisition cost. Think of it as the same way. If you're like a marketer, you probably heard the term, your CPA, cost per acquisition, pretty much the same thing. So you have your customer acquisition cost, right? Which in most cases will probably be around like 15%. But then from there, now let's say this client was, or let me just grab this over. Come on, get out of your circle. So let's say, you end up retaining somebody. So this is the initial cost to acquire them, right? So that's your 15%. And then from here, let's say we upsell. The upsell will probably be around, like 8 to 10%. So let's just say like 10% on retention on the high end. Right, so now we actually get a 5% margin back on the recurring. So the longer we actually keep them, right? So this person pays us like 10K right here. So let's say they pay us like 10,000, or let's keep the math simple. Say $1,000, or you pay, they pay you $1,000. From here, they're paying you, and like your cost on this would be, would be 15% of this, which would be $150, right? So what your profit actually is like 850. And again, this is like profit before like any sort of overhead, fulfillment costs, expenses, or anything. But on this right here, you know, if you just upsell people, your profit on the back end is actually 90, or excuse me, 900, right? Because the 10% of 1,000 is only 100, right? And this also is 15% acquisition cost. This is only like usually sales team and like commissions and stuff like that. Like this could also be, right, if you're running ads as well, right? Like this could also be your marketing costs, excuse me, let's say the marketing cost is like 30%. So you take an extra 300 off this. So you pay like 550, for example, to, or, you know, you walk away with 550 profit, but then every month after that, you actually have 900 profit, right? So like, that's another thing to keep into consideration too. Your margins actually get better with the longer retention, with a higher LTV over time. In an agency. So that's why retention inside of an agency is so important, because you actually save on margin, right? So let's say same thing here. Your marketing costs are probably 20 to 40%. And then from here, your profit, again, it's like pretty much the same exact numbers as you can see here, is around 40 to 70%, right? And these numbers can get better with time. The reason why you typically see higher like profit in a coaching business is because like it's usually a larger upfront payment. So like somebody's usually charging like 5 to 10K. We're in an agency, if you're new, like a newer agency, you might be charging 1,500 to like maybe 5K a month max, like usually 1,500 to 3K a month. But you can see the margins here actually look pretty good. But now, let's say like after 100K, right? So now you're starting to scale your business. Now you're starting to look to hire and trying to build up your team, right? So now your margins are going to look slightly different. So let me just get rid of all of these, or I can keep some of these here. Just add this back. Here, I'll just pause this. All right, so now we're talking about scaling your business, right? So what this now looks like is if you have a coaching business, you're probably hiring multiple CSMs, right? So you probably have a CSMs, and you probably also have like a client success, like not a CSM as in, or not like a client success manager as in a CSM, but like a manager for your actual client success team, right? So now what we're looking at is anywhere from like, typically, again, like on the low end, it's usually 5 to 10%, but you're probably maybe looking at even like 15 to 20% potentially on fulfillment at scale, right? And this would be, you know, let's say like one manager, 2 CSMs. Right now, like operating costs have also gone up, because maybe you need like a better CRM, like maybe you went from like GHL, but now you need like HubSpot or something. So now you can see your operating costs also increasing. And then from here to, you know, like you might need like a VA, like a full-time VA on your team, some more assistants, etc. Right? So now your fulfillment cost goes up. Sales, what you'll typically see is like, you know, you'll have your standard 15% setter closer commissions, but then you might also give out like an extra like 2 to 5%, even upwards of like 8% for a sales manager as well too. And so that sales manager could get a higher percentage of that. So now instead of 15%, we could be looking at like at least 20% on the sales side, right? Even upwards like 25%. And then from here, what we do, or what we'll look at here is, again, we have a, like, even let's say 2 sales reps. Now, if they're not on base, then again, it's all commission based. 2 setters, usually want 1 setter per every rep. And then from here, you have like a sales manager, which he's usually honestly getting a base plus a percentage of the sales, right? So now let me just move this all over here. So now marketing, as you start scaling up, your ROAS is going to decrease, right? We have clients who, when we launch under 100K, they have like crazy 5-10x ROASs, even on cash collected. But as you start scaling, you're going to start seeing that, you know, probably reduce down to like 3 to 5x is what we typically see on average. So let's say even at like a 4x, which is good, right? Like that would still be 25%, right? Because your ROAS is, you know, how much money you're spending on ads, or excuse me, how much money you make divided by how much you spent on ads. So if you spend 10,000 on ads, you make $2,500. Excuse me, if you make 10,000 on ads and you spend 2,500, that'd be 25%, right? So that's where we get that 25% from, which is 4x. So from here, this will usually just be, at this point, you usually have a media buyer, right? And actually, so this cost will typically increase as well too. So a media buyer, let's say this is like 30%, right? We have a, you know, the media buyer plus the ad spend, or again, you're working with an agency, and like at this point, if you're making 100K a month and you're paying a really good agency like 10%, you know, you're probably making, that's usually around 10K. So now from here, you got a media buyer slash agency. and you might also have like a content hand. However, you're probably doing a lot of the content still yourself, so I probably wouldn't say content, but you probably have like editors, ad spend, and a few other things here too. And you're probably also starting to pay for more attribution softwares like Hyros, etc. So let's move everything down here a little bit, give us a bit more room. So now we go up to the top here. If we add these up, right? So like on the low end, you have 15 plus 25, 40. So what you're probably looking at is like around 30% here. Or if we look at the on the higher end, right, we just add an extra 5%. So you're probably looking, honestly, anywhere from like 25% to 30. But again, like it really depends. Like some people might be able to get their fulfillment costs down a bit. To be honest, your marketing will probably be a bit more expensive. It could be upwards of like 40%, right? So we could be looking at anywhere from like 15% to 30%. Now, where a lot of people do is they freak out when they see these margins, right? But when you actually do the math out, like, for example, some people are like, oh no, I want my margins to stay at 70% forever, which is just grossly unrealistic. But let's say we go over here. And again, for most coaching businesses, some people can get away with really, really high margins because they have like really cheap CSM, so they've optimized their fulfillment, right? Like the best thing that you can really do here, like you can obviously optimize marketing, and sometimes you get some grand slams, and like you get really cheap cost per leads. You can usually keep your sales team, like these are usually relatively fixed costs, like marketing and sales. But what you can do is optimize fulfillment. So, right, for example, in our business, we do full done for you sales and marketing for our clients. So, like typically when we come in, like these are usually pretty fixed as is, right? So like your marketing costs, your sales costs, right? But when you go up here, what we do is we actually allow our clients to just focus on fulfillment, right? So by us taking the sales and marketing off their plate, literally we take all of this, and there's usually a bit more to it than just this as well too. And like obviously all the tasks associated with this, like being a media buyer is a pain in the ass job, right? Like now if you're running low spend, it's very easy. However, if you're running like with some of our clients, $500, $750, $1,000 a day, potentially more as well too. You don't really have the time to like really like your job as a media buyer, like you're optimizing campaigns, like even one campaign upwards of multiple times per day, every few hours, right? Depending on the spend, like $500 a day, you're probably optimizing at least once per day, like going in the account and actually making some sort of optimizations. So like all of these tasks here really add up at scale. Obviously there's, if you need to hire like videographers as well too, if you need to hire, teams to do creatives, right? Like this is where people usually get bogged down. But the most variable, like the biggest variable in here is probably your fulfillment costs that you can control, right? In terms of your margin. And if you can get this down, if you can optimize this even down to 10%, anything that you bring down here just goes straight to the business owner in terms of profit, right? So like this would be like owner distribution, right? So like what you should be focused on here as a business owner is not like and obviously, yes, how do I optimize my margins? But like at the same time too, let's look at it. Let's say you have, let's say you make like 500K in a month. In 1 month, right before the profit margin was like 70% at 100K, right? So let's say like 100K per month, right? Like at this number here, 500K per month, right? Just add the per in here. Just grab this here. All right, why aren't you letting me press enter? 1 sec. So it's being annoying here, so let me just add it in here. So let's say 500K per month, right? You are taking home, let's say like the average between here, like 20%, like even on the low end, 20% of 500K equals, what is that number? That is 100K, right? And what most business owners do is they freak out and they go, well, I want to maintain my like 70% margins at 100K per month. But what is this? This is 70K. Right, so this is the difference between $30,000 a month in income that could be going into your pocket, right? But again, like this is where most people, like especially when it comes to scaling your business, like it actually does take a lot to scale a business. Most people think that, especially in the coaching side, they're like, oh, if I just sign more clients and I keep my fulfillment the same and still use like very novice beginner CSMs, the product's going to continue to improve. It's going to continue to expand. We can keep scaling this thing. We can make more money. But what they end up doing is they just seriously end up like fucking their business pretty hard, to be honest, right? So like what they'll do is like they neglect like all this stuff here, or like even hiring a proper manager. They just literally try to scale their business just with this, And like, they will usually be pretty good with operating costs, or they just literally use VAs and CSMs, and they think that just like hiring like VAs and CSMs is literally just going to scale fulfillment. They don't take into account managing these CSMs, even potentially hiring a manager. And then in sales, now what a coach tries to do is they're usually trying to manage a sales team, a marketing team, a fulfillment team. They're trying to manage all of this by themselves. And then yeah, you can't do this under 100K a month, right? Like, and then you can easily cut a lot of these things out and keep it simple. So like I guess what I'm getting at here is if you run a coaching business, like, and you don't want to actually scale your coaching business, it might not be in your best interest to do so, right? You can actually like, this is usually what it takes. And like, yeah, your margins aren't as sexy, right? But like, again, like if you can optimize this better, let's say this is like 30% as well too. 30% at 100K is 150K a month income, right? So like if you definitely want to continue to scale your income and you're somebody who's very driven by that and also like to create more impact as well, you will need to actually build out an actual team here. Like you can't hit 500K a month like with that same, like literally with that one CSM, no manager, like, very low operating costs, like no assistants or anything, right? Same thing. You can't hit those numbers without a proper sales team, sales managers, unless you're selling like a 250K package, like 250K a month package or something like that. Like, and you get 2 of those deals a month and you can do that by yourself. Sure. Other than that, you need to build out a proper team to do this. So now let's go down to the agency margin, right? So let me move this out of the way. So when it comes to fulfillment costs for an agency, you're typically looking at least, I would say, a 20 to 25% fulfillment cost, right? So if we look over here, again, coaching was like 15 to 20%. Agencies 20 to 25, possibly even 30, depending how like, if you're hiring like expert media buyers for taking on very high level clients, the fulfillment cost here like is going to be a lot higher because again, you're usually hiring media buyers, you need to build out a team, you're paying for the infrastructure, right? And your team is your infrastructure. With coaching, you can get away with like little infrastructure in the beginning and then you need to build it eventually. But with an agency, you do need to actually account for the infrastructure and building that out early, right? You can't just kind of wing it as you go on an agency side. Now, one thing I also do want to point out is your margins also, like the number one thing that actually like directly impacts your margins is your price, right? Like let's say, this is where a lot of people forget is like, this number right here, like let's say we just doubled our prices on our service here. None of this would change. Like all this would stay the exact same, right? Like in terms of who we have. Let's say we doubled our prices, right? This right here would be $1 million. 1 million per month. And at like, even let's go back to 20%, right? 1 million a month, that would be 200K a month, right? 200K a month profit. And like all this would stay roughly the same. And if anything, you could just pay your team more. So one thing I always recommend is like push your price to its limit in terms of like, make sure that your metrics are healthy. Look at your close rates, look at all these other metrics. If you can, like just push your price higher. And also make sure that you can justify the result as well for raising your price. But a lot of times too, people go like, what do I need to do to raise my price? A lot of times it's, well, you were charging too low in the beginning. Like if your closers, let's say they're good closers, or like let's say they're average and they're still closing at like 40, 50, 60%, your price is probably too low, right? Like if anything, you actually want to see like a 25 to 35% close rate. Sometimes you can still get 40% even with even higher prices before you kind of cap out. But like if your closers are like ripping deals, you're probably charging too little. And if you yourself are closing at like 90%, 100%, like even 80%, your prices are probably still too low. It's okay to have some price friction, right? It's not your product shouldn't be for everybody. But instead of trying to lower your price to target a less sophisticated market, try to think of like who can you target that actually can afford to pay these prices. So let's go back down here. So fulfillment costs is usually like media buyers and an agency. You usually have like a creative team as well. On top of this too, again, you have like graphic designers, stuff like that. So that would all go under creative team. But your fulfillment costs, again, like your operational costs, like you probably have like a data person on the team as well too, who's analyzing the data. And then like some other miscellaneous expenses here. But yeah, you're typically, again, investing more in the infrastructure. Your sales team, I would say, so like, again, it's like 15% typically. However, I'm going to say like 15 to like 12%. The reason why I want to do it this way, right, is because again, like describing down here, your acquisition cost, right, in the beginning is usually higher because you're spending money on ads, etc. But then on the back end, you don't have a customer acquisition cost, your cost of acquiring a customer at like a, or on the back end is literally like your commission that you're paying the sales rep, right? So like let's say it's like 15, but then like the reason why I say 12 is because like even if it's like 8% recurring commission, depending on your LTV, it will probably average out to maybe around 12. It can technically never get down to a true 8% if that's what you're charging, because there's always that fee on the front end too, right? So to keep it simple, right, like you'll probably average out at around 12% total in terms of commissions, right? But like let's say even 10%, let's say you have really good LTV, let's say 15 to 10. And again, even at scale, like you might have a manager, so like let's say this is like 20, and again, like with good LTV, you can get them down like 12 or something like that. So this might be like sales manager, sales reps, and then setters, right? And again, these are all commission based. This guy might be a base or commission here, or gal. So now we go down to marketing, right? Your marketing costs are going to be roughly the same here. Like I would say around 40%, right? So now with these numbers, right, we can see like on the low end, it would be 20, 40, 80, right? So this could be like upwards of like, so what we could be looking at is like a 20% margin. Or obviously as things get better over time, right? Like, so we could see 20 or on the high end, on the low end would be 20, 12, 40%. Right, so on the front end, these would be front end metrics if we took the 20% here. But on the low end would be 20, 12, what is that? We're looking at 32 plus 40, 52. Hold on. So that would be 72. So we're looking at like 28% margin on the low end. But on the high end, we could be looking at 30 plus 20, which is 50 plus 40, which is 90, which is so like 10% margins. Right, I know, like, again, there's things you can do to optimize here, but like the reality is like it is expensive to run a business at scale, right? Like you need more team members. You need to, you go from paying literally nobody but yourself to a team. It's going to become more expensive. The more money you make, the more people you're going to need to hire, right? Which will take down your margin. However, if we look back up here again, like what's do we want 70% of 100K or do we want, 20% of a million? Right, and so these numbers are very different too in terms of how much money you're making. This person's making like, what is that, like 840K a year. This person's making 2.4 million a year, right? So like it's very different income that we're looking at here. So with that said, again, if you're somebody who really and also just enjoys the building of the process here, right? Again, this will be like ad spend. Let me just add this in real quick. We got ad spend. We also got media buyers. Right, and again, like if you're running an agency, you're probably not using your own media buyers. Like you probably have different media buyers for your fulfillment team versus your own independent team, right? So this could actually even increase this by a bit more too. But yeah, again, like editors, creative team, etc. Right, so at the end of the day, like the margins again, like even for an agency, they're always going to be slimmer than a coaching business, right? Because we see 15 to 30%. Down here, we're seeing like 10 to 28%, right? And like, again, these are pretty average from what I've seen. Again, there's things you can do to optimize, but on average, this is typically what you're going to see. So with that said, right, like here's a few things I want to point out. Number one, like if you want to scale up a coaching business or scale up an agency, know what you're getting yourself into first. Like, and also think like, do you really want to scale? Right? So like the thing that the thing we do at our company, right? So what we do at Client Igniters is we literally do the done for you sales and the done for you marketing, right? So like what we do is we take all of this off our client's plate so they can focus on trying to squeeze more margin out of this here, right? So that will just add on to their profit. Like let's say they can lower the fulfillment down to like 15%, for example. That would add an additional 5% margin here, which would bring up to like 33% margins, right? And like at scale, it's really hard to do anything to, edit this here. Right, and like what our team does is we charge a percentage on the back end here, right? So we charge a percentage of revenue, right? So that way, like we just know exactly what we're taking out of the margin, and it's consistent every single month, and there's not that variable expense, right? But like if you really want to scale, first of all, if you do want to scale, like and you don't want to manage the sales and marketing, but you don't mind optimizing fulfillment at scale, then like definitely reach out to me. We can see if we can help you out. We don't work usually with agencies. We typically work directly with coaches. If you are an agency and you have questions, feel free to reach out too, and I can kind of give you some advice and some feedback on what to do at scale here. But when it comes to scaling up a coaching business, like again, like just know what you're getting into, and same thing, if you're looking to scale up an agency, knowing what you're getting into. Do you really want to manage a team? Do you really want to, make hires? Do you really want to, like, are you comfortable managing massive ad budgets? And do you want to hire not only the people to manage the budget, or not only spend the money on the ads, but also pay the people to manage your ads, and then also manage the people that you're paying in order to manage the ads, or pay a manager to pay. You see what I'm getting at here? So like, with all that said, like, what I want to do is just break everything down here to show you what does it actually look like to scale a coaching business versus scaling an agency. And if you do have any questions on any of this too, feel free to reach out. But what I want to do is just paint a full picture here and just try to eliminate the confusion, and also just honestly set the expectations, right? Like, I've spoken with agency owners recently who even mentioned that they, a thing that's really important to them is they want to keep their margins at least 50% at scale, right? Which we would all love to do, right? And like, even these people that we spoke to, they were incredible. And like, they came in with the right intention. But like, when it comes to actually growing and scaling a business of this magnitude, you just have to be realistic on what your margins are and what your expectations are in terms of what you're actually going to be paying. So I hope this video was helpful. If you have any other questions, feel free to go ahead, drop them down below. You can comment them here. You can also reach out to me at Noah Friedman on Instagram. Handle is, here, let me just add a text box at Noah Friedman right there. Go ahead and follow me on Instagram if you'd like to as well too. And also feel free to subscribe. And if you do like this video, then like it if you like it. So with that said, go ahead and subscribe if you'd like to. And again, there'll be a lot more content like this as well. So if you have any questions, drop them down below, and I'll see you in the next video.